The heat doesn't wait for you to wake up. Before your eyes even open, the light is already punching through your reed-woven hut, announcing itself with the subtlety of a sun god in a bad mood. The roof, barely shielding you from the unforgiving sky, glows faintly orange, lit from above by the rising Egyptian sun. You're lying on a thin mat made from papyrus, draped in linen so thin it might as well be a rumor. There is no curtain to draw, no glass to block the heat, and no air conditioner to sigh with relief. Just the slow bake of another relentless day on the edge of the desert. A breeze, the kind promised by idyllic travel brochures, does not arrive. If it ever existed, it likely died sometime during the reign of a long-forgotten pharaoh. You sit up, already sweating, your linen tunic sticking to your skin like wet parchment. There's no pillow, no mattress, no softness at all. Just the crackle of sand grinding between your shoulder blades and the floor. As the sun climbs higher, the temperature rockets past 90 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-morning, and that's just the start. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a land of gods, grandeur, and gastrointestinal distress. Before we go further, take a moment to relax. This is Medieval Nocturnes, where we use boring history to lull you into sleep. If you're enjoying the journey so far, consider subscribing. It helps us grow, and it tells the algorithmic sun god that we're worth watching. Now, dim the lights, maybe put on a fan, and let's continue. You step outside and immediately regret it. The sunlight attacks you, not warms you, not greets you, but attacks. Your tunic might as well be made of mist, no sunscreen, no aloe, not even a modest-brimmed hat. The wealthier classes might have access to protective oils made from animal fats and herbs, but you've got mud. If you're lucky, it's crocodile dung, which ancient rumor says wards off sunburns. It's unclear whether that's due to its properties, or the fact that people avoid you when you're covered in it. The ground beneath your feet is cracked and burning. By midday, the stones lining the paths are hot enough to cook lentils. Shade is elusive. A few mud brick homes cast shadows, but they're small and crowded. Trees, a myth. You find a corner by a sweating wall and press your back against it, hoping for relief. The bricks radiate warmth like a kill. You feel like a loaf of bread slowly toasting in Ra's divine oven. In ancient Egypt, the sun is not just weather, it's theology. Ra, the sun god, watches from above, his power reflected in the day's intensity. The more you suffer, the more divine he feels. There is no complaining. To whimper is to insult the celestial order. And so, with your skin already stinging, your throat dry, and your body as sweaty as a Nile frog's armpit, you begin your day not with prayer, but with sheer, blistering survival. You're barely functional, but necessity pulls you forward. The Nile, source of life and host of horrors, awaits. It's where you bathe, wash clothes, gather water, and accidentally step on squishy things you'd rather not identify. You smell it before you see it, a thick, musty odor, like a swamp married a fish market and got divorced in the sun. The banks buzz with frogs, flies, and creatures that seem undecided about how many legs they're supposed to have. Still, this is your bathroom. Soap, never heard of it. Instead, you embrace the Egyptian ritual of exfoliation, grabbing a fistful of sand and scrubbing it against your skin. It's not pleasant, not effective, and definitely not gentle. But it counts as cleanliness. You call it hygiene. Your skin calls it punishment. Your clothes get the same treatment. You beat them against river rocks, while side-eyeing the water for crocodile tails or floating refuse. Upstream, livestock wander into the river. Somewhere, someone's funeral procession sends another wrapped body downstream. The water might shimmer in the morning light, but it's a sacred petri dish. You're not alone as you wash. Women, children, neighbors, ibis, birds, and the occasional stray goat all share this communal space. Privacy doesn't exist. A basin in the city might offer a touch more dignity, but for most, it's the Nile or nothing. You load clay water jars and balance them on your head. It's a daily feat of balance and endurance, made harder by the relentless heat. If you're lucky, you get back to your hut before the jars become miniature ovens. If you're unlucky, one breaks, and your punishment is an extra trip and a sunburn that peels for days. The Nile, for all its sacred status, is a contradiction. It gives life, but it also threatens it. You can drink from it, but not without consequences. You can fish in it, but not without risk. You can pray to it, but it won't keep leeches from latching onto your ankle. Ancient Egyptians revered the river as a god Hapi, but you suspect the deity has a dark sense of humor. Now semi-clean and carrying more sand in your tunic than you left behind, it's time to eat. You're not excited. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't a treat, it's a gritty necessity. You squat on the packed dirt floor or a low stool if your household is lucky. Your feast, bread, hard, dense, jaw-breaking bread made from barley or emmer wheat. You bite in and immediately crunch something that isn't flour. Surprise, sand, again. A daily dose of uninvited minerals, courtesy of your community's stone grain grinders. There's beer, too, but it's not the cool, crisp drink of tavern dreams. It's thick, lukewarm, and cloudy. A chewy porridge with a hint of sour. Everyone drinks it, even children, not because they're rebellious, but because the Nile water is often worse. At least the brewing process kills most of the parasites. Probably you gnaw your bread, sip your sludge, and try not to gag. This is your fuel, your ticket to survive another morning of heat, sand, and whatever punishment the gods deem character building. Breakfast is not joy, it's a chewy negotiation with existence. You've had your gritty bread and your sour liquid bread, also known as beer. And now it's time to work. Not the kind of work with desks and coffee breaks. This is sweat and dust, muscles and blisters kind of work. Unless you were lucky enough to be born a scribe, a priest, or royalty, and you weren't. Your job is purely physical. Ancient Egyptian labor doesn't care how you slept. The Nile is your time clock, and it's already ringing. If you're a farmer, you're ankle-deep in river mud before the sun finishes climbing. Your tools, wooden plows, sickles made of sharpened flint, and your own fingers. You yank weeds with your bare hands under the gaze of an overseer who wields a stick and a grudge. There are no sick days, no ergonomic tools, and certainly no union. Your bent back is a badge of honor, or at least of survival. If it hurts, that just means you're doing it right. If you're a construction laborer, things get even grimmer. You haul multi-ton stones on foot, barefoot, up ramps, made of gravel and prayer. There's no pulley system, no machines, just muscle, sweat, and shouting. You trip, that's a broken ankle, maybe a broken life. If you work on tombs, well, good luck. You're carving limestone in narrow, suffocating tunnels, building eternal homes for people who will be resting longer and better than you ever will. Mess up a royal burial chamber, and the consequences aren't just a scolding. It could mean your burial chamber gets sealed while you're still breathing. That's one way to ensure the pharaoh's peace in the afterlife, by eliminating every witness. If you're a woman, don't think you've escaped the grind. Domestic work here is labor. You're grinding grain on stones that chew through your hands. You're hauling water, weaving linen, tending children, and, when you're not doing all that, you're helping in the fields. Your break comes only if the baby falls asleep. And even then, your hands don't stop moving. Time doesn't belong to you. The sun is your manager, and it doesn't care about your schedule. When it reaches its peak, the air becomes syrup thick. You wipe your face with your tunic. It soaks through immediately. You keep moving, because if you stop, someone else gets your ration of grain, and you get blame. There's no clocking out. The day ends only when Ra, the sun god, dips back behind the horizon. By nightfall, you're caked in dust, and your legs threaten to collapse beneath you. You dream of rest, not the soft kind, but just a few minutes of not being needed. And still, the day isn't over. You have mouths to feed, fires to stoke, tools to clean, and prayers to whisper. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just exhausting, it's eternal. You don't labor to thrive, you labor to exist. It's a physical contract with the land, the river, and the gods. And the fine print says, if you fall behind, you disappear. You've made it through another punishing day. Your limbs ache, your lungs feel like they've inhaled half the desert, and your stomach is considering whether one more chunk of sandy bread counts as a meal or a dare. You want to grumble, just a little. Maybe say, this job is killing me, or, why am I digging holes for people who'll be dead longer than I'll be alive? But don't, not here, not in ancient Egypt, because in this world, complaining isn't just frowned upon, it's dangerous. The man you work for, he's not a boss, he's not a landowner, he's not even just a king, he's a god. The pharaoh isn't just the ruler of Egypt, he is Egypt, the divine incarnation of Horus on earth, the son of Ra, the one chosen by the heavens to maintain Ma'at, universal order, balance, truth. His face is carved into walls, stamped onto coins, etched into bread molds. His name echoes in every temple ritual. He is everywhere and sees everything. Or at least, that's what you're told. To question him, even quietly, is to question divine will. If the river floods and blesses the crops, thank the pharaoh. If it doesn't, well, maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Maybe your neighbor whispered something disloyal. Or maybe the gods are testing your faith. So when you stub your toe on a stone block or find yourself hauling water under a midday sun, you don't mutter curses, you bow your head. You remind yourself that you are fortunate to sweat in his name, because those who don't, those who voice doubts, speak out, or question orders, they vanish. If they're lucky, it's into obscurity. If they're not, it's into prison, slavery, or a tomb they didn't choose. You'll likely never see the pharaoh in person. He moves through the world like a myth, carried in golden barges, glimpsed during festivals from a distance, too wide to matter. Blink, and he's gone again, back into his palace, surrounded by layers of guards, priests, and scribes. But his presence hangs over everything. Statues, murals, public rituals, it all screams loyalty, order, and power. And if you happen to work on a royal project, say a tomb, a temple, or a statue taller than your house, then you say you're honored. You chant that it's a blessing to carve stone for 14 hours a day, because pretending you're joyful is safer than revealing you're not. You don't revolt, you don't organize. The last village that tried to resist tax collection. Gone, erased, their fields plowed over, and their memory left to fade. That's the cost of disobedience in a land where kings walk with gods. So yes, you work for a divine ruler, and you survive by staying quiet. It's enforced through ritual, through fear, and through the relentless heat of a sun that watches, judges, and never forgets. If you thought the sun was your worst enemy in ancient Egypt, wait until you meet your true nemesis, sand. It's not just a backdrop or a landscape, it's a constant companion, an uninvited guest in every part of your life. Sand is your roommate, your seasoning, your exfoliant, and your slow, gritty undoing. It's in your clothes. Linen, the fabric of choice in Egypt, is light and breathable, but also wide open to invasion. Sand slides down your tunic like it owns the place. It clings to your skin, nestles in your armpits, and somehow gets behind your ears no matter what direction the wind blows. There is no escape. You sleep in it, you eat it, you breathe it. Every loaf of bread you chew grinds just a little too loudly because it's laced with grit. Grinding stones used to mill the grain leave behind tiny flakes of quartz and rock, which get baked right into the dough. So each bite is part nourishment, part dental demolition. This isn't culinary drama, it's archaeological fact. The teeth of ancient Egyptians, even young ones, were worn down like river stones. You chew your breakfast, and your molars file themselves down in the process. Congratulations, your meal doubles as oral surgery. And your house, not safe either. Mud brick walls crack and crumble, and your windows have no glass. A breeze becomes a dust storm. Your floor is coated in fine powder. Your cooking pots need constant rinsing. Even your bed, your sad little reed mat, is full of the stuff. Sand doesn't sleep, but it makes sure you can't either. If you're lucky enough to own sandals, they're made of woven reeds. Functional, maybe, durable, rarely protective. Absolutely not. Most people go barefoot, which means the soles of your feet are always tender, always bruised. Step on a sharp rock, and you're limping for days. And if you get a cut, well, we'll talk about medical care later. Let's just say infection is eager and waiting. And then there are the sandstorms. Egypt's slap from the gods. One moment, you're talking to a neighbor. The next, you're blind, coughing and blinking through a swirl of dust that feels like powdered glass. Visibility vanishes. Your eyes burn. Your tunic whips around you like a flag in chaos. Everyone becomes a smudged silhouette in the swirling tan fog. You don't run. You crouch, cover your face, and wait. When it's over, you're coated in a second skin made of the desert itself. You think about bathing, but then you remember the Nile, sand in the river, sand in the mud, sand on your skin again by the time you walk home. It's a vicious, dusty circle. In ancient Egypt, the desert isn't just around you. It becomes part of you. You can't beat it. You can only surrender. And with every blink, every bite, and every breath, you're reminded that the gods shaped this world, not with mercy, but with sand. In ancient Egypt, you're never truly alone. Not because of your family, your neighbors, or the occasional ibis picking around your feet, but because the gods are everywhere. Every corner of your life is intertwined with them. They don't just govern the skies and the underworld. They dictate your routine, your meals, your sleep, and your death. Religion here isn't a choice. It's your operating system. Wake up, thank Ra for returning with the sun. Spill your beer. Apologize to Hathor, goddess of joy. Stub your toe. Bite your tongue. Set. The god of chaos is always listening, and you don't want to catch his attention. Every act, every gesture, every whisper could be interpreted as praise or insult. Temples loom across cities and villages, each dedicated to a specific deity. One town worships Sobek, the crocodile god of the Nile. Another reveres Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. There's Bastet, the cat goddess, who guards homes, and Anubis, who watches over the dead. Their images are carved into walls, painted on pottery, worn around necks in the form of amulets. You're not just a person, you're a participant in a divine network. Even funerals are elaborate spiritual journeys. When someone dies, their soul doesn't simply drift off. It enters a complex afterlife process involving judgment, demons, and symbolic rituals. Before reaching peace, the deceased must pass tests, avoid supernatural traps, and prove their moral worth. If they fail, they don't get punished, they get erased. Total annihilation. For Egyptians, that's worse than death. The most crucial test, the weighing of the heart. At the Hall of Mat, your heart is placed on one side of a scale. On the other sits the feather of truth. If your heart is heavier because of lies, cruelty, or disrespect, it's fed to Ammit, a monster with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of a hippo. She doesn't judge, she just eats. But here's the irony. This system, terrifying as it sounds, comforts people. It provides structure. If you honor Mat, truth, balance, justice, you stand a chance at eternal peace in the field of reeds. There, you can eat without hunger, work without pain, and sail the Nile under soft, golden skies, but only if you play by the rules. The richer you are, the easier it is to play. You can afford tombs, priests, mummification, scrolls from the Book of the Dead, all divine cheat codes for the poor. Faith is a gamble. You hope your offerings are enough. You trust that the gods are feeling generous, and you pray that you didn't forget a ritual. So no, religion isn't a Sunday affair. It's a full-time job. The gods are your government, your weather forecast, your HR department, and your security system. And whether you're praying for rain, childbirth, or protection from scorpions, one thing is clear. Every moment is sacred, every mistake costly. In ancient Egypt, your survival depends as much on pleasing the divine as it does on escaping the sun. You wake up feeling wrong. Maybe it's your stomach twisting in ways it shouldn't. Maybe your skin itches, or your eyes are red and swollen. In ancient Egypt, getting sick isn't rare, it's routine. You live in the heat, you drink from a river shared by crocodiles and funeral barges, and your food is half sand, half guesswork. So when illness strikes, you go to a healer. But don't expect bandages and thermometers. You're entering a world where science and sorcery walk hand in hand. First, you're taken to the local SNU, an Egyptian doctor. These healers are surprisingly advanced for their time. They have medical papyri filled with case studies, herbal recipes, and detailed anatomical notes. Some know how to stitch wounds with linen thread. They can reset broken bones. They even perform surgery in some cases using copper tools that have been disinfected with beer or honey. And yet, no treatment is complete without magic. The healer doesn't just diagnose, he recites spells. Illness isn't purely physical, it's also spiritual. A fever might be from bad water, or it might be a ghost that resents your haircut. You get honey and moldy bread to fight an infection, which, interestingly, works, since honey is antibacterial and mold contains penicillin-like properties. But before it's applied, he chanced to invoke protection from Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of plague and punishment. You've got a headache. Someone grinds up onions, mixes them with oil, and rubs it on your scalp while whispering a hymn. Got a cough that's possibly a demon coiled in your chest. Out comes a mix of crushed dates and cow dung smeared across your torso. There's logic here, strange as it sounds. The dung draws out the bad air, or so they believe, and if nothing else, it distracts you from the cough. Eye infection. Time for a salve of ochre, honey, and lizard blood applied gently to your lids. You might be told to sleep with an amulet under your pillow, a small carved figure that keeps bad spirits at bay. You don't question it, you cling to it. And if it's serious, if there's a cut that won't stop oozing, a fever that won't break, or a tooth so rotten it poisons your blood, then you face the harshest truth. Painkillers don't exist. Anesthesia is a hand to bite on. Dentistry is pliers forged by a blacksmith with a loose understanding of tenderness. Your choices are endure, risk death, or surrender to whatever force the gods decide is afflicting you. But in all this, there's something strangely reassuring. The doctor doesn't dismiss your fears. He treats the body and the soul. Whether you're cured by the herbs or the hymns doesn't matter. What matters is that someone is trying. In ancient Egypt, medicine is a prayer. And if you're lucky, today, the gods are listening. You might think being a woman in ancient Egypt meant invisibility, voicelessness, or subjugation. And sure, parts of that are true, but the reality is more complicated and more exhausting, because while Egyptian women had rights rare for the ancient world, they also had responsibilities that made empowered feel more like exhausted. Start with the rights. Women could own property. They could divorce their husbands, sue them in court, inherit land, and run businesses. Compared to many later civilizations, this was practically revolutionary. A woman could be a priestess, a landowner, even a pharaoh. Just ask Hatshepsut. In the legal system, she was a person, on paper, but in practice, she was everything, and always busy. Your day starts well before sunrise. You grind grain using a saddle quern, a stone slab, and a handheld grinder that turns wheat into flour and your spine into gravel. Then you haul water from the Nile, a back-breaking trip made worse by the blazing sun and the risk of stepping on something sharp or venomous. You cook breakfast for the family, manage the household, tend to children, feed animals, and if your husband needs help in the fields, you go. Your calendar is full. You just don't own one. Pregnancy is a risk. Childbirth is a gamble. There are midwives, and there are prayers. That's it. There's no sterile room, no anesthesia, and no guarantee you'll survive. You lie on packed earth, surrounded by incense and hopeful faces, praying that neither the gods nor the bleeding go the wrong way. Fashion offers little relief. Your linen dress is light, sleeveless, and clings in the heat. But there's no underwear. Sand sneaks into every fold. You go barefoot unless you're wealthy or heading to a temple. Insects constant. They treat your body like a buffet. Perfumed oils might help if you can afford them. If not, you swat and endure. And yes, there is makeup. Kohl eyeliner, powdered malachite, red ochre for cheeks. It's not just for beauty, it's protection from the sun and infection. But the applicators are crude, the materials sometimes toxic, and the luxury fleeting. Because you still have to get dinner ready, keep the fire burning, and make sure no toddlers wander into a well. If you're from a wealthy family, life is better. You might read, write, manage estates. You wear jewelry, live in a cooler home, and have servants to handle chores. You might even wield political power. If you're royalty, you could become a queen, regent, or pharaoh. Your eyeliner is sharper than your enemies, and you dine beneath gold-leafed ceilings. But most women aren't royalty. They're tired, their hands are calloused, their feet are cracked, and they hold society together with a strength history often forgets. So yes, ancient Egyptian women had rights, but rights don't lighten the water jar. They don't soothe a crying child or cool a fever. In this world, power and pain walk hand in hand, and you, dusty and determined, are expected to carry both. You've survived another day, barely. Your arms ache, your lips crack, and your stomach is as empty as the promises of a gentle Nile breeze. But in ancient Egypt, surviving the day is just a warm-up, because your real challenge doesn't begin until you die. Death isn't the end here. It's a transition, a test, a bureaucratic marathon through the afterlife that makes your daily grind look like a nap under a date palm. You don't simply drift into darkness. You enter a cosmic courtroom, and the stakes, eternity. First, your body is prepared. If you're wealthy, you're embalmed, organs removed, body dried with natron salt, and wrapped in fine linen. Amulets are placed across your chest. Your face is covered with a golden mask, your tomb painted with spells. You're given a book of the dead, a spiritual cheat sheet filled with prayers, magic, formulas, and directions through the underworld. It's less a book and more of a cosmic passport. But if you're poor, you're wrapped in old cloth, maybe a jar of beer or bread placed nearby, and buried in a shallow grave with hopes, not guarantees. No spells, no priests, just sand and silence. Then the journey begins. Your soul, or Ba, rises from your body, ready to face judgment. You enter the Hall of Mat, an awe-inspiring chamber where 42 gods await. You must recite the negative confession, a list of all the things you didn't do. I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not curse the gods, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey. Each statement must be perfect. Miss one, forget a line. The consequences are cosmic. And then comes the main event, the weighing of the heart. Your heart, believed to house your soul and all your deeds, is placed on one side of a scale. On the other side rests a feather, the feather of Mat, symbolizing truth, balance, and justice. If your heart is lighter than the feather, you pass. You get to enter the field of reeds, a heavenly mirror of Egypt, where there's no hunger, no heat, no back pain, and your linen never clings to your thighs. It's eternal peace, shaded fields, and slow-moving boats under a cool sun. But if your heart is heavier, you don't go to hell. You get erased, devoured by Ammit, the soul-leading beast with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hind legs of a hippo. No trial, no appeal, no afterlife. You vanish forever. You can be doomed not just by your actions, but by your words, by your memory, by forgetting a ritual or missing a line. It's an open book test, but the price of failure is obliteration. So Egyptians didn't just fear death, they prepared for it, obsessively. Tombs were built for decades, spells memorized, offerings made, not out of superstition, but because they believed eternal life required eternal planning. Because in ancient Egypt, life is just the first audition. The real show begins after your last breath. If there's one mercy ancient Egypt offers, it's linen, glorious, breathable, plant-based linen. In a world ruled by heat and dust, it's your only defense, the lightest armor against the scorching sun. Every man, woman, and child wears it, not for fashion, but for survival. It doesn't stop the sand, it doesn't cool the body, but it breathes. And in a climate that feels like being slow-cooked by a celestial furnace, that counts for something. Your wardrobe isn't vast. If you're a commoner, you likely own one, maybe two garments. For men, that's a short kilt or loincloth. For women, it's a straight, sleeveless dress that clings more than it drapes. No layers, no frills, no seasonal options. The temperature doesn't drop enough to justify winter wear. Linen is your uniform for planting, praying, working, sweating, and eventually dying. And no, there's no underwear. That concept hasn't arrived yet. You're free under the tunic, and the sun makes sure you feel every gust and grain. As for shoes, optional. Most people walk barefoot on hot sand, sharp stones, and whatever happens to lie in the streets of Memphis or Thebes. If you do own sandals, they're made of braided reeds or leather strips, better than nothing, but still no match for a jagged path or a wayward thorn. Laundering your clothes is an ordeal. It involves the Nile, elbow grease, and prayers that the current doesn't steal your only outfit. You scrub with sand or plant ash, slap garments against rocks, and rinse until your fingers prune. All the while, hoping crocodiles stay distracted elsewhere. When you hang the tunic to dry, it stiffens in the sun, dry, clean, and ready to collect more sweat by the next morning. Accessories exist, but most serve a purpose. Amulets protect you from spirits. Beaded necklaces signal status. Eye makeup, kohl made from powdered galena, shields your eyes from glare and infection. Even vanity has practicality here. The kohl-lined stare isn't just for seduction, it's for survival. But for all this linen and ornament, you're under siege from the smallest creatures, flies, gnats, mosquitoes. They don't care about your elegant pleats or polished copper earrings. They swarm you constantly, treating your exposed skin as a buffet. You dab on perfumed oils made from myrrh or lotus, if you can afford it. If not, you swat and suffer. You scratch and sweat. You endure. There's no escape from the bugs, the heat, or the grind. But there's pride in staying clean, at least for a little while. Pride in wrapping your body in the same fabric worn by priests and pharaohs. Pride in stepping out under Ra's burning gaze and saying, "This is the best I can do." In ancient Egypt, linen doesn't just clothe the body, it defines it. In life, it's your shield. In death, it's your wrapping. In both, it's a quiet, constant reminder that comfort is temporary, but dignity is forever. If you're alive and standing past your 30th year in ancient Egypt, you're considered something of a miracle. Not because you've conquered kingdoms or built pyramids, but because you've simply outlived your odds. Most people never get that far. Childhood is a battlefield. Adulthood is a race against time. And every sunrise is a gamble against heat, hunger, and happenstance. Infant mortality rates are brutally high. Many babies don't survive their first year. Disease, malnutrition, poor sanitation, pick your poison. Even something as simple as a fever could turn deadly without medicine. If a child makes it to 5, there's cause for celebration. If they make it to 10, they're already considered old enough to help with chores, farming, or water hauling. There's no childhood in the modern sense. No toys, no school, no carefree days chasing butterflies. There's work from the start. By the time you hit 13, you're expected to marry, work full-time, and raise your own children. Your body becomes a tool for survival, yours and everyone else's. You don't ease into adulthood. You're thrown into it with the force of a flooding Nile. For women, the risks multiply. Pregnancy is dangerous. Childbirth, even more so. Without surgical care or infection control, many mothers die during labor. The survivors often face injury, hemorrhage, or complications that shadow them for life. And there's no recovery period. You're expected to return to your tasks within days. Baby in one arm, grain basket in the other. Injuries that would be minor today, scrapes, burns, insect bites, can quickly turn fatal here. There are no antibiotics, no bandages, unless you count linen strips soaked in oils and hope you catch a fever. You drink a poultice, whisper a prayer, and sweat it out. Or you don't. Crocodiles in the Nile, scorpions under stones, snakes slithering through fields. Even the environment itself seems eager to kill you. Add the constant exposure to sun, sand, and hard labor, and you understand why the average lifespan for a commoner hovers around 30. Not because the body fails, but because the world doesn't wait. And yet, the Egyptians aren't gloomy. Death doesn't frighten them the way it might us. They prepare for it early, saving for tomb goods, weaving Shabti dolls to serve them in the afterlife, and planning burial rites like they're organizing a long trip. Death is inevitable. What matters is how well you live, and how carefully you prepare for what comes next. So, if you've reached 35, you're not just older, you're respected. You've outlasted famine, floods, curses, and back-breaking days under the eye of Ra. You've buried friends, siblings, maybe children. You carry scars, wrinkles, and a slow limp. And still, you wake up each morning and do it all again. Because in ancient Egypt, survival isn't a given. It's an accomplishment. And every extra year you get is one more chance to work, to worship, and to earn your place among the stars. You've taken your last breath. Your body is still, but in ancient Egypt, that doesn't mean you're gone. Not yet. Death here isn't the end. It's the start of a journey so intricate, it makes your earthly struggles look like a warm-up act. And if you haven't prepared, you may as well not bother crossing into the afterlife at all. The wealthy begin preparing for death while they're still young. A tomb isn't a place you're dumped in. It's an estate, an investment, a blueprint for eternity. You hire artisans to carve walls with your achievements and prayers. You save up for pottery, food offerings, jewelry, and perfume, items you'll need in the next world. And if you're really wealthy, you commission a sarcophagus and hire scribes to copy down the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and instructions to help your soul navigate the divine red tape of the underworld. You're also embalmed. First, your body is washed in Nile water. Your internal organs are removed: liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. All carefully dried and stored in canopic jars, each protected by a specific deity. Your heart is left in place or placed carefully with you, depending on the tradition. Your brain, pulled out through the nose and discarded. Apparently, Egyptians didn't think much of it. Next, you're packed with natron, a natural salt that dehydrates your body and stops it from decaying. This takes weeks. Once dried, you're wrapped in layer after layer of linen, sometimes up to 100 yards of it. Charms and amulets are placed between the layers, symbols of protection, prosperity, and safe passage. Finally, your mummified body is sealed in a decorated sarcophagus, ready to face the afterlife. But if you're poor, it's a different story. You're buried in a shallow grave, wrapped in whatever cloth your family can spare. Maybe you're given a clay pot of beer or a few onions as offerings. Maybe you're not. There's no carved tomb, no magical scroll, just earth above you and memory below. Still, even the poorest Egyptians cling to hope. The field of reeds, heaven, isn't reserved only for the rich. If you lived justly, honored the gods, and followed Maat, you still have a shot. But the rich, they improve their odds. They buy better afterlives, the way nobles today buy beachfront property. Your tomb becomes your resume. Your body becomes your passport and your offerings. They're the supplies for your eternal commute. Because death is a journey, one filled with demons, judgment, and metaphysical paperwork. But if you get it right, you reach paradise, a perfect version of Egypt, with no suffering, no hunger, and all the beer you can drink, clean this time. So no, death isn't the end. It's the longest, most complicated trip of your existence. And like any seasoned Egyptian knows, if you want to travel well, you better pack early and pray the gods like what they see. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Your tomb is sealed. Your journey to the afterlife is underway. Time to rest in peace, right? Not quite. Because in ancient Egypt, even the dead aren't safe. If you thought toiling under the sun was brutal, imagine spending eternity constantly at risk of being looted by someone with a chisel and poor impulse control. Tomb robbery wasn't rare. It was practically a profession, and not just one of desperation. Sometimes it was an inside job. The very workers who built your tomb might return years later, this time with tools not for carving walls, but for prying open your sarcophagus. Why? Because tombs weren't just resting places. They were treasure troves. Gold jewelry, ornate amulets, alabaster jars of perfume, linen, ceremonial weapons, carved figurines. If you were a pharaoh, you were buried with wealth that could finance an army or tempt a starving stonemason. Some tombs even contained entire boats meant to ferry souls across the spiritual Nile. And yet, you're defenseless. You can't fight back. So your only protection, fear. Tomb walls are inscribed with curses, graphic, terrifying threats designed to scare off would-be thieves. May your limbs twist forever. May crocodiles eat your soul. May a serpent of fire burn your name from history. These weren't just dramatic warnings. They were considered real and powerful. But curses didn't always work. Desperation, famine, and greed often outweighed superstition. Robbers came at night. They tunneled through the walls, bypassed stone seals, and smashed burial goods to get to what they wanted. Even priests and guards were sometimes in on it. During times of political collapse, the sacred became expendable, and the punishment severe. If caught, robbers faced mutilation, exile, or execution. But with the Nile drying up and granaries empty, that risk sometimes felt worth it. Survival over sanctity. It wasn't just royal tombs. Common graves were also targeted, less for gold and more for supplies. A pot of beer, a few onions, some linen. These were still valuable in a time when food was scarce and cloth could be used for trade. Sometimes it wasn't greed, but necessity. Parents would rob graves to feed their children. Theft, in these cases, was survival, desperate and tragic. The irony is sharp. Egyptians devoted their entire lives to preparing for death. Tombs were their sanctuaries, filled with prayers, protection spells, and heartfelt hopes. But all it took was one intruder with a pickaxe to shatter centuries of spiritual planning. So no, your sarcophagus isn't a fortress. Your amulets aren't foolproof, and your eternity. It's only secure as long as no one figures out where you're buried. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife isn't just a journey, it's a risk. And the greatest threat to your peace may not be divine judgment, but a man with a torch and empty pockets. You've seen them on tomb walls, temples, statues, intricate, elegant, strange, rows of birds, eyes, snakes, reeds, and men walking sideways, hieroglyphs to the modern eye. They look like art, decorative, mystical, but in ancient Egypt, they were something much more: sacred language, cosmic technology, and the single most powerful tool of memory ever carved into stone. There were over 700 hieroglyphic symbols in use, and they weren't alphabet letters. Some represented full words, others individual sounds, and still more acted as determinatives, symbols that clarified meaning. Writing the word sun might involve the image of a sun disk, a sound symbol, and a god's name, all layered together to create more than just a sentence. It was meaning folded into visual poetry, but don't expect vowels. Ancient Egyptian script left those out. And don't look for punctuation either. Sentences flow without breaks. The only guide you have is the direction the characters face. If the birds look left, you read left. If they face right, you go right. And if they're upside down, good luck. Learning to read and write hieroglyphs wasn't for everyone. In fact, it was for almost no one. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of the population could decipher these symbols. If you wanted access to the written word, you had to become a scribe. That meant years of rigorous training, starting in childhood. You'd copy out endless scrolls, memorize thousands of glyphs, and practice until your hand cramped and your back ached. But the payoff was immense. Scribes were powerful. They didn't haul stones or dig canals. They recorded taxes, penned laws, chronicled lives and deaths, and transcribed prayers meant to carry souls through the afterlife. A scribe could ruin you or immortalize you. With a few strokes of a reed brush, he could alter your legacy forever. Hieroglyphs weren't just functional, they were magical. Egyptians believed that writing had divine power. To write someone's name was to preserve their soul. To erase it was to destroy them completely. Tomb robbers weren't just thieves, they were spiritual assassins if they defaced names on sarcophagi. Memory wasn't just important, it was life itself. The walls of temples were covered in hieroglyphs for this reason. Each line wasn't just a record, it was a spell, a story, a petition to the gods, a guarantee that the dead would be remembered, and that their journey to the field of reeds would be smooth. To us, hieroglyphs might look like ancient emoji, but to the Egyptians, they were the universe written down. They told stories of floods and pharaohs, love and loss, gods and grain. And they whispered of a belief so deep, so enduring, that it still echoes today in silent chambers beneath desert sands. In ancient Egypt, the pen wasn't just mightier than the sword, it was eternal. Let's step back for a moment. You've waded through Nile mud, sweated beneath a punishing sun, survived on gritty bread, and avoided divine wrath by the thinnest margin. And now the question echoes, could you, a modern human, well-fed, air-conditioned, medically insured, actually survive even one full day in ancient Egypt? The short answer? Probably not. At least, not without serious consequences. First, there's the climate. Egypt isn't just hot, it's relentless. The air chokes with dust. The sun doesn't warm you, it punishes you. Without sunscreen, you'd burn in an hour. Without constant hydration, you'd faint by midday. And remember, the only drink on hand is warm beer, maybe some river water, if you're brave or reckless enough. Now imagine trying to navigate this with modern sensibilities used to hygiene. There's no soap, no plumbing, no private bathroom. You're either squatting over a pit or relieving yourself near a wall and rinsing with Nile water. Toothpaste, a mix of crushed rock and ash that scrapes your enamel raw. Shampoo, try a handful of oil and a prayer. Hungry, hope you like repetition. Your meal is the same every day. Bread, onions, lentils, beer, sometimes fish, occasionally figs or dates. There's no refrigeration, no seasoning beyond salt, and no guarantee anything is fresh. Spoilage isn't a deal breaker, it's a Tuesday. Injure yourself, cut your foot, get a splinter hauling bricks. You'll be treated with a paste of honey, herbs, and maybe dung. It might work, it might not. There are no antibiotics, no antiseptics, no painkillers. Surgery is blunt and fast. Dentistry is violence, with pliers. Feeling tired, sleep won't save you. Your bed is a mat on a hard floor. Your pillow is made of carved wood. Mosquitoes buzz like tiny curses. You toss, you turn, and when you finally drift off, you're jolted awake by the noise of animals, neighbors, or the early rising sun. Emotionally, you're not in control either. Your life is dictated by gods, seasons, floods, and an unseen bureaucracy of priests and tax collectors. One wrong word, one missed offering, and you could lose your home, your field, or your life. You have no freedom of speech, no legal counsel, no healthcare hotline, just superstition, survival, and submission. Sure, the culture is rich, the temples are breathtaking, the art is astonishing. But as a commoner, you're never near any of it. You don't tour pyramids, you build them. You don't gaze at hieroglyphs, you carry the man who carved them. Your life is labor, your world is small, and every day is a fight between sun, sand, and skin. So could you survive a day in ancient Egypt? Technically, yes. But it would leave you blistered, dizzy, dehydrated, and probably in awe of those who lived it daily. Because they didn't just survive, they made history. You'd be lucky to make it to dinner without crying into your lentils. From the outside, being a pharaoh looks like the best gig in the world. You wear gold collars and linen, so fine it feels like air. You command armies, shape laws, and build monuments taller than your memory. Everyone bows. Priests chant your name. Artists carve your face into stone. You're not just a king, you're divine. The living God, the son of Ra, Horus, in human form. But power in ancient Egypt is heavy. And being a pharaoh, it's not just privilege. It's pressure, cosmic, constant, and inescapable. Your job isn't just to rule, it's to uphold Mat, the sacred balance of order, truth, and justice. The sun rises because you exist. The Nile floods because you honor the gods. If anything goes wrong, a bad harvest, a rebellion, a plague, people don't blame chance, they blame you. Not because you made a bad decision, but because your divine essence is out of sync with the universe. Your failure isn't political, it's spiritual. So you live under scrutiny, 24/7s, not from the press or paparazzi, but from priests, astronomers, generals, and the gods themselves. Every ritual must be perfect, every temple offering made, every decision weighed against eternity. You must be both warrior and priest, diplomat and deity. There's no room for error or emotion. Your days are a whirlwind of ceremonies, sunrise rituals, blessings, inspections of temple projects. If you fall ill, the country trembles. If you die young, it could trigger national panic. Your face appears on statues, not just for ego, but for stability. The people must see you, believe in you, fear you. And despite your palace and attendants, your life is profoundly isolated. No one treats you like a person. Servants don't look you in the eye. Advisors flatter, but rarely speak freely. Even your own children are tools of legacy. Marriages are political. Love is optional. Trust is rare. You might have hundreds of wives, but intimacy is fleeting. You eat alone. You pray alone. You sleep surrounded by guards. Every moment of your life is curated, choreographed, and wrapped in protocol. You're not allowed to be unsure, afraid, or wrong. You're a god, but a god who bleeds, ages, and ultimately dies like everyone else. And when you die, the real circus begins. Your body is embalmed over 70 days. Your tomb, built for decades, becomes a sacred vault. Your heart is weighed, your name etched into eternity. But even that can be undone. A rival pharaoh can chisel it out. A tomb robber can desecrate your body. History can forget you. So yes, being pharaoh means power beyond comprehension. But it also means pressure beyond relief. You're worshipped, but never embraced. You're obeyed, but never understood. You walk alone in a crowd of reverence. In ancient Egypt, ruling like a god sounds glorious, until you realize gods aren't allowed to be human. Every towering statue, every gilded temple, every pyramid slicing into the Egyptian sky. None of it exists without the hands of thousands who never saw their names chiseled in stone. Beneath the gold, beneath the glory, lies the muscle of Egypt, its servants, its laborers, and yes, its slaves. These are the invisible architects of ancient greatness, and their lives were anything but divine. Let's start with a mythbuster. The pyramids were not built by slaves, at least not in the Hollywood sense. The workers who hauled those blocks, some weighing more than 2 tons, were skilled laborers, often paid in bread, beer, and shelter. They weren't chained, they weren't whipped. They were part of a massive, organized state workforce that rotated in shifts. Think national service, not brutal captivity. That said, the labor was still punishing. You're lifting limestone in 100-degree heat, straining your back for hours, grinding your feet into the dust. Injuries are common. Medical care is minimal. Your food is basic. Your rest brief. The worksite is loud, hot, and chaotic, but it's also a source of pride. These men, yes, mostly men, believed they were building something eternal, that their labor pleased the gods, and in that there was honor. But beyond the pyramid projects lies a much broader system of servitude. Domestic servants in noble households tended gardens, fetched water, cleaned floors, cooked meals, and raised their master's children. Some were born into service. Others were acquired through war, trade, or punishment. While not all were slaves in the strict sense, many had no freedom to leave, no property of their own, and no hope for advancement. You live in the shadow of someone else's life, essential but invisible. Slavery where it existed, looked different from modern ideas. Slaves could own property. Some could even buy their freedom. But make no mistake, they had no rights, no legal standing, and no protection if their master decided they were expendable. You could be gifted, traded, or passed down in a will. You weren't a person, you were an asset. Women in servitude faced added dangers. Beyond endless chores, they were vulnerable to exploitation. There were no laws protecting them from abuse, no justice system that heard their complaints. Their survival depended on silence, obedience, and luck. And yet, life among the lower classes wasn't always bleak. In workers' villages like Deir el-Medina, evidence shows strong communities, people who shared resources, practiced religion, and even went on strike when their rations ran late. These weren't mindless drones. They were craftspeople, stonecutters, painters, and masons who left behind stories in graffiti and broken tools. Still, whether you carried bricks or poured beer, the truth remained. Your work built someone else's afterlife. Your sweat made possible the palaces of priests and pharaohs. And when you died, there were no golden coffins, no spells carved in hieroglyphs, just a shallow grave, and maybe, if you were lucky, a loved one who remembered your name. In ancient Egypt, glory was a pyramid, but someone had to stack the stones. The Nile is everything. It isn't just a river, it's the spine of the kingdom, the giver of life, the source of crops, trade, and survival itself. Without it, Egypt is a sandpit ruled by hunger and despair. With it, it's a miracle of green in an ocean of gold. But the Nile, generous as it may seem, has moods, and when it fails to rise, so does everything else. Each year, the Nile floods. Ideally, it spills over its banks and soaks the surrounding fields with nutrient-rich silt, turning barren earth into fertile farmland. The timing and size of this flood are sacred. Too little, and the crops wither. Too much, and villages drown. The entire rhythm of Egypt, its planting, its harvest, its religion, is built around this divine pulse. In a good year, the fields yield barley, emmer, wheat, flax, figs, and vegetables. Granaries swell, bread and beer flow. Taxes are collected in grain, and workers are paid in loaves and jugs. Even the poorest can find food in street markets. Offerings are plentiful. Temples buzz with activity. It's stability, born of mud and sun. But in a bad year, when the Nile fails to flood, or floods too much, chaos follows. Fields crack and dry, harvests shrink, granaries grow empty, prices rise, fast and cruel. Bread becomes scarce, beer goes sour, and the poor eat whatever they can find, roots, boiled weeds, even clay. Hunger gnaws at the bones of the kingdom. People riot, cities suffer. Even the tomb builders at Deir el-Medina strike because their rations are delayed. Imagine being so hungry you protest at your own boss's funeral plan. Famine doesn't just kill bodies, it kills faith. If the Nile doesn't rise, the people don't blame nature, they blame their leaders. The pharaoh must have failed to honor the gods. The priests must be corrupt. Something in the balance of Mat has been broken. The result? Political instability, social collapse, and sometimes even rebellion. It gets worse when famine joins hands with disease. Malnutrition weakens immunity. Dirty water spreads illness. Children die first, then the elderly. Funerals outnumber weddings. Cemeteries fill faster than granaries. And yet, life goes on, somehow. People pray harder. They fast, sacrifice, plead with the gods to let the flood return. Some leave their homes and wander in search of food. Others sell their livestock, then their tools, and finally themselves, indentured into servitude just to survive another season. Dignity becomes a luxury few can afford. And when the Nile finally does return, it feels less like a flood and more like forgiveness. The land turns green again. Hope crawls back into villages. But scars remain on the body, on the soul, on the fragile system that keeps Egypt afloat. In ancient Egypt, prosperity isn't a guarantee. It's a balancing act, delicately perched on the tides of a single river, one that gives, one that takes. And when it turns its back, it doesn't matter who you are, a farmer, a priest, or even a pharaoh. Without the Nile, you're just dust waiting for wind. Walk through any ancient Egyptian temple, and you'll be watched, not just by priests or guards, but by gods with falcon heads, jackal snouts, lion manes, and crocodile jaws. Egypt didn't worship in abstract. Here, the divine had faces, often animal faces. And these weren't just metaphors. To the ancient Egyptians, the gods were real, powerful, and everywhere. Their forms weren't strange, they were sacred. Start with Ra, the sun god. He rides across the sky in a fiery bark, reborn each morning and swallowed each night. His head, that of a falcon, crowned with a blazing sun disk. His eyes see everything. His light sustains the world. But at night, he descends into the underworld to battle chaos. He is creator and defender. And every sunrise is proof he won. Then there's Anubis, guardian of the dead, lord of mummification. He appears with the sleek black head of a jackal. Why? Because jackals lurk near cemeteries, drawn by scent and silence. The Egyptians saw this and thought, who better to protect the dead? Anubis doesn't judge your soul, but he ensures your body is treated with respect. He's there during embalming, guiding the ritual, blessing the linen. Horus, the sky god, is also falcon-headed, often shown in battle armor. He's the son of Osiris and Isis, and his right eye is the moon, his left the sun. When he fights, kingdoms tremble. When he rules, peace follows. Every pharaoh claims to be Horus on earth, divine in lineage, unstoppable in war. Speaking of Isis, she's one of the few gods shown mostly in human form, but her power is unmatched. Mother of magic, protector of children, and resurrector of her murdered husband, Osiris. Her tears cause the Nile to flood. Her spells bend the laws of death. Women and men alike worship her, hoping for love, healing, and guidance. And then, of course, there's Thoth, the eye-besetted, god of writing, wisdom, and time. If you're a scribe, you owe him your pen. He invented language, measured the stars, and kept track of who deserved eternal life. Without Thoth, the underworld would be chaos, and the calendar a disaster. But not all gods are gentle. Take Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of war and plague. She was once sent to punish mankind for disobedience, and nearly wiped out humanity before being tricked into drinking blood-colored beer. Then there's Sobek, the crocodile god, dangerous, fierce, and unpredictable. Farmers and soldiers made offerings to him for protection, because angering a crocodile deity is a risk no one wanted to take. Each deity had temples, festivals, priests, and followers. Religion wasn't separate from life. It was embedded in every task. You prayed before planting crops, before fishing, before childbirth. Gods weren't just prayed to, they were feared, honored, painted, and carried in sacred processions through city streets. They governed health, weather, war, love, and memory. To us, the animal heads might seem bizarre, but to Egyptians, they were symbols of divine function. A falcon saw far, a jackal knew the dead, a lion protected, a crocodile ruled the waters. Their features weren't strange, they were tools of spiritual truth. In ancient Egypt, the divine wasn't distant, it had a face, and it looked right back at you. Forget sweeping royal weddings and slow-motion love stories. Romance in ancient Egypt was earthy, practical, and sometimes surprisingly tender. This wasn't a society of cold arranged marriages and sterile unions. Egyptians loved, desired, married, divorced, and even wrote poetry about heartbreak. But like everything else in this world, love came with rules, rituals, and expectations shaped by sand, gods, and survival. Marriage wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no temples involved, no priests declaring eternal bonds. A couple simply agreed to live together, often in their teens, and the union was recognized by the community. Wealthier families sometimes drew up marriage contracts, detailing dowries, property, and inheritance rights. These weren't love letters, they were legal armor. And if the couple separated, those documents spelled out who got what. But don't let the lack of ceremony fool you. Affection was real. Husbands and wives referred to each other as my sister and my brother, not literally, but as a term of deep closeness. Love poems found in papyri reveal passion, longing, and devotion. One lover writes, "I am yours, like the land planted with wheat. I belong to you in every season." Another writes of waiting outside their beloved's door, heart racing like a bird. In daily life, couples worked together. She ground grain, fetched water, and raised children. He plowed fields, built homes, or served in the army. Marriage was as much a partnership of survival as it was of affection. You relied on each other, not just for comfort, but to endure a hard world. Sex was natural and openly acknowledged. Gods themselves were sexual beings, Osiris and Isis, Hathor and Horus. Love, fertility, and desire were all part of the divine cycle. Erotic amulets, fertility statues, and sensual art weren't scandalous. They were like. That said, fidelity mattered, especially for women. Adultery could be grounds for divorce, social ruin, or even punishment. Men were granted more leniency, though elite women occasionally took lovers of their own, sometimes at great risk. Children were expected early and often. They were joy, legacy, and economic help. Infertility was feared, and remedies included magical spells, herbs, and prayers to fertility deities like Base and Toret. If a woman gave birth safely, she offered thanks at temple altars. If she didn't, she was mourned deeply. Motherhood was dangerous, and every pregnancy could be a gamble. Divorce was possible, and surprisingly common. If a couple no longer got along, or if one partner was abusive or unfaithful, they could separate. Women had the right to initiate divorce and reclaim their dowries. No public shame, no lifelong stigma. Life was hard enough without forcing unhappy people to stay together. For the wealthy, marriage was often political, uniting noble houses or strengthening alliances. But even among royalty, personal affection could bloom. Pharaohs praised their wives in inscriptions, honored them in tombs, and sometimes even ruled alongside them. And in death, married couples were often buried together. Tombs show them side by side, holding hands for eternity, carved in poses of affection and partnership. In ancient Egypt, love wasn't always poetic, but it was real, grounded, and enduring. Whether whispered in the rushes or written in ink on papyrus, it reminded the living that even in a world ruled by gods and death, the human heart still found time to want and to belong. Ancient Egypt may seem like a land of labor and ritual, but even the most devout farmer or stern-faced priest needed a break. Life was harsh, yes, but it wasn't joyless. The Egyptians understood something deeply human, that survival isn't enough. You need music, you need games, you need beer. Let's start with music. It was everywhere, at feasts, in temples, on boats drifting down the Nile. Musicians played flutes, lyres, harps, tambourines, and a deep-toned instrument called the sistrum, a rattle sacred to the goddess Hathor. Singing was as natural as breathing. Workers sang in the fields. Women sang during childbirth. Even religious ceremonies echoed with chants and melodies. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was spiritual. Some hymns were prayers. Some rhythms were thought to chase away evil spirits. And if you were lucky enough to attend a noble's banquet, you'd hear musicians alongside dancers, wine servers, and guests reciting poetry under perfumed garlands. Then there was beer, more than just a beverage. It was nourishment, it was wages, it was daily ritual. Made from fermented barley and baked bread, Egyptian beer was thick, nutritious, and only mildly alcoholic. Children drank it, workers drank it, priests offered it to the gods. It was safer than Nile water, and far more satisfying than prayers alone. Beer wasn't just for quenching thirst, it was a social glue. People gathered to share jugs in mud-brick courtyards. Women brewed it in clay jars. Recipes were passed down like family treasures. Even in the afterlife, the dead were buried with jars of beer to sip in paradise. And when the sun finally dipped and work paused, there were games. The most famous, Sanote, a board game played with grids, tokens, and a sense of cosmic fate. It wasn't just for fun, it symbolized the soul's journey through the afterlife. Each move mattered, each square held meaning. Pharaohs were buried with their Senate boards, their wooden pieces lined up for eternity. Other games included Maon, a serpent-shaped board game, and Hounds and Jackals, which involved pegs and strategy. Kids played simpler versions with bones, stones, and sticks. Laughter echoed in dusty courtyards. Competition flared, but joy endured. Even fashion could be playful. Women wore perfume cones on their heads, waxy scented ornaments that melted in the heat and released fragrance through the evening. Men and women alike painted their eyes not just for protection, but for beauty. Jewelry wasn't just spiritual, it was stylish. Color, sound, and scent blended into a kind of daily theater. Festivals brought all this together. Cities lit up with parades, sacrifices, dancing, and feasting. Locals took time off work to honor gods, drink with friends, and listen to storytellers recite myths under the stars. For a moment, everyone, slave or scribe, farmer or noble, stood together in celebration. So yes, ancient Egypt was a land of toil, ritual, and survival. But it was also a land of delight. Theirs was a joy found in rhythm, shared meals, and games by lamplight. In the face of mortality, they chose music. In the face of scarcity, they brewed beer. And in the face of eternity, they carved out time, however brief, to laugh. You wake with a fever, your joints ache, your stomach twists. What do you do in ancient Egypt? There's no hospital, no antibiotics, and certainly no painkillers. But that doesn't mean you're without hope, because in this world, healing is a sacred mix of magic, prayer, and some truly bizarre remedies, some of which, strangely, worked. Medicine in ancient Egypt wasn't divided into science and superstition, it was both. Illness wasn't just a physical malfunction. It could be the result of a curse, an angry god, or an evil spirit lurking inside you. So treatment came from two fronts, a physician's knowledge and a priest's invocation. Doctors, called SNOE, were respected professionals. Many trained in temples, studying scrolls filled with symptoms, herbal formulas, and surgical advice. Their manuals were detailed, even by today's standards. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes setting broken bones, stitching wounds, and examining head trauma. The Ebers Papyrus lists hundreds of remedies for everything from toothaches to childbirth pain. But those remedies, let's just say you needed a strong stomach, got an infected wound. Try a poultice of honey and moldy bread, actually effective thanks to natural antibiotics. But it might be paired with crocodile dung, believed to ward off evil. Suffering from constipation. Take a mixture of figs, castor oil, and ground carob for birth control. Pounded dates and acacia gum inserted with linen. Not exactly modern science, but based on ingredients that did have contraceptive properties. Eye infection. You might be given copper salts mixed with crushed green eye paint. Coughing. Sip a concoction of milk, honey, and herbs, boiled with donkey fat. Some of it soothed, some of it stank, some of it, well, made things worse. Then there was magic. Healers chanted spells over patients, drawing protective symbols on their skin, or placing amulets around their necks. The goddess Sekhmet, known for unleashing plagues, had to be appeased daily to prevent illness. Base, the dwarf god, protected against nightmares and childbirth dangers. Toret, the hippo goddess, was called on during labor. Demons were real here, and the right words spoken in the right order could drive them out, or so they hoped. Doctors often worked alongside priests. One treated the body, the other soothed the spirit. Healing was holistic. Your mind, soul, and flesh were all entangled. And if nothing worked, you weren't abandoned. You were given comfort, prayers, maybe a final spell to ease your passage into the afterlife. Despite their mystical leanings, Egyptians were keen observers. They understood that diet mattered, that injuries needed cleaning, that some herbs helped and others harmed. They performed surgeries, pulled teeth, and even performed trepanation, drilling into skulls to relieve pressure. Crude, yes, but incredibly advanced for the time. So when you fell ill in ancient Egypt, you weren't without recourse. You had rituals, remedies, and resilience. You drank bitter herbs by moonlight. You wore charms against invisible threats. You whispered the names of gods as your fever broke or claimed you. In a world without modern medicine, healing was an act of faith, invention, and survival. And even if it didn't always work, the effort itself, rooted in care, tradition, and belief, was its own kind of cure. In ancient Egypt, justice wasn't blind. It wore a feather and carried a ledger. That feather belonged to Mat, the goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order. Every Egyptian, from pharaoh to farmer, lived under her gaze. Break her laws, and you didn't just risk prison, you risked damnation, both in this life and the next. There were no jails in the modern sense. Crime was handled swiftly, often publicly, and always with consequences designed to restore balance. Theft, assault, adultery, blasphemy, each had a punishment, and none were light. This was a world where wrongdoing wasn't just a breach of law, it was a disruption of divine harmony, and that made justice a sacred duty. Most disputes started at the local level. Village elders or officials heard cases, weighed testimony, and often relied on written evidence or confessions. But trials weren't always fair or free from intimidation. Confessions could be coerced, sometimes violently. A thief might be beaten until he confessed. A suspected adulteress might be interrogated with threats or public shaming. Truth, in Egypt, could be as fragile as pottery. Punishments ranged from fines and beatings to mutilation and exile. A common thief might lose a hand. A corrupt scribe could be publicly flogged and removed from office. More serious crimes, murder, tomb robbery, treason, could lead to execution, usually by beheading or impalement. In some cases, the offender's name was erased from records, tombs, and monuments. In a culture obsessed with legacy, this was a fate worse than death. Religious crimes were particularly dangerous. Defiling a temple or insulting a god wasn't just sacrilege, it was treason against the entire kingdom. The priesthood had immense influence, and their judgments could sway royal decisions. Even pharaohs had to appease Maat or risk divine backlash. But justice wasn't always cruel. Egyptians believed in compensation and restoration. If someone damaged your property, they might pay you in grain or goods. If a servant mistreated a child, they could be fined. The goal wasn't just punishment, it was balance. Maat demanded harmony, not vengeance. Magic crimes were trickier. Casting harmful spells, cursing someone, or using love magic without consent were considered serious offenses. Accusations of witchcraft could lead to exile or execution, especially if livestock died or illness spread mysteriously. Priests often performed rituals to detect sorcery, burning figurines or consulting omens for answers. Fear of magic ran deep, and so did its influence on law. The ultimate trial came after death. Your heart, weighed against the feather of Maat, would determine your fate. If it was heavy with sin, the devourer, a monstrous creature named Ammit, would consume it. No afterlife, no peace, just oblivion. But if your heart was pure, you entered the field of reeds, where justice and joy were eternal. In life and death, justice in Egypt was clear. Uphold order, speak truth, do no harm. Whether judged by elders or by Osiris himself, your actions echoed across eternity. So if you think a slap on the wrist is coming, think again. In ancient Egypt, the law wasn't just written, it was carved into your soul. They rise from the desert-like mountains, carved by gods, massive, mysterious, and seemingly eternal. The pyramids of ancient Egypt are among the most iconic structures in human history, yet they remain deeply misunderstood. They weren't built by aliens. They weren't secret energy generators. They were tombs. Tombs with a purpose, a message, and a legacy etched in stone. The most famous of all is the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu over 4,500 years ago. It originally stood at 481 feet tall, taller than many modern buildings, and was sheathed in polished white limestone that reflected the sun so brilliantly it could be seen for miles. Today, that outer casing is mostly gone, but the core remains, a staggering 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. The scale alone is hard to grasp. No steel, no cranes, just manpower, ingenuity, and time. Contrary to myths, it wasn't built by slaves. Archaeological evidence suggests the workforce was composed of skilled laborers, fed well, housed nearby, and rotated seasonally. These were proud Egyptians, not prisoners, and they believed they were building something sacred, something that bridged life and death. And that's the key. The pyramids weren't just royal graves, they were resurrection machines. The pyramid's shape, reaching skyward, symbolized the sun's rays. Pharaohs believed they would ascend those rays and join the sun god Ra in the heavens. The internal layout was precise, with passageways aligned to stars and chambers designed to guide the king's soul into eternity. Every brick had meaning, every angle intention. Inside, things were simpler than you might expect. No treasure-filled halls, no elaborate mazes. The true burial chamber was often hidden deep inside, sometimes sealed off after burial with heavy stones and traps meant to foil robbers. And yet, most pyramids were looted within a few centuries. Even the Great Pyramid was emptied long before modern explorers ever set foot inside. There's more than just Khufu's pyramid. His son Khafre built the second largest at Giza, complete with the Great Sphinx, a mysterious guardian with a lion's body and possibly Khafre's face. Menkaure, the grandson, built the smallest of the 3 Giza pyramids, still enormous by any measure. Earlier pyramids weren't even true pyramids. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara was a series of stacked mastabas, flat-roofed tombs, layered into a stepped design. It marked the beginning of pyramid architecture and was designed by Imhotep, a genius priest-architect, later deified as a god of wisdom. Later, pyramids, especially in the Middle and New Kingdoms, got smaller and more hidden. Why? Because giant stone markers shouted to tomb robbers, riches buried here. Kings began building secret tombs in places like the Valley of the Kings, carved into cliffs and disguised by the desert. Still, the legacy of the pyramid endured. It symbolized divine order, royal power, and humanity's longing to touch the sky. Even today, no structure captures the imagination quite like it. In ancient Egypt, a pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a promise that the pharaoh would rise again, that memory would defy time, that stone could hold back death. In the world of ancient Egypt, death wasn't an end, it was a doorway, a transition, a perilous journey through a landscape more terrifying than life itself. The afterlife wasn't promised, it had to be earned. And even then, you had to survive the most grueling adventure your soul would ever face. The Egyptians believed that after death, your Ka, your spiritual double, left your body. But it didn't go straight to paradise. First, it had to navigate the Duat, the underworld. Think of it as a cosmic obstacle course, a labyrinth of lakes, fire pits, gates, serpents, demons, and rivers of darkness. To make it through, you needed a map, a guide, and protection. Enter the Book of the Dead. It wasn't a single book, but a collection of spells, incantations, and instructions, often written on papyrus and buried with the deceased. Its purpose: to teach your soul what to say, what to do, and how to survive. Say this spell to avoid being eaten by the snake. Recite this verse to pass through the gate of flame. Declare these words before the judge of the dead. That judge was Osiris, god of the afterlife. Green-skinned, mummified, and regal, he presided over the Hall of Two Truths. There, your soul underwent the ultimate test, the weighing of the heart. Your heart, believed to hold your thoughts and deeds, was placed on a scale. On the other side, a feather, the feather of Mat, symbol of truth and justice. If your heart was lighter or equal in weight, you passed. If it was heavy with sin, it failed, and the punishment, immediate and irreversible. The devourer awaited Amit, a monstrous blend of crocodile, lion, and hippo. If your heart tipped the scale, she consumed it. Your soul was annihilated. No afterlife, no second chance, just oblivion. But if you passed, your soul entered the field of reeds, a mirror of Egypt, but perfect. The Nile flowed wide and pure. Crops grew without effort. You reunited with loved ones. You could fish, farm, and rest forever under gentle skies. There was no hunger, no fear, just peace. Yet getting there took preparation. While alive, you commissioned your tomb, collected grave goods, and paid scribes to write spells. You hoped your family would perform the proper rites, speak your name, and keep your memory alive. Because forgetting was a second death. Even in paradise, sustenance mattered. That's why tombs were packed with food offerings, figurines to serve you, and even jars of beer. A well-stocked burial wasn't luxury, it was insurance. The afterlife required maintenance, just like life. For the Egyptians, death wasn't scary because it ended things. It was scary because it continued them forever. And eternity had rules. So, if you wanted to survive, you didn't just live well, you prepared relentlessly. You honored the gods, followed the rituals, and memorized your lines like a play. Because when the curtain rose on your soul's final act, the audience included jackal-headed judges and feather-toting goddesses. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife wasn't a dream, it was a test, and only the wise, the worthy, and the well-prepared made it through. In a world where most ancient societies treated women as little more than property, Egypt stood apart. Here, a woman could own land, run a business, divorce her husband, and even become a pharaoh. She still lived in a patriarchal society, but within it, she wielded more autonomy, more respect, and occasionally more power than her sisters in Greece, Rome, or Mesopotamia ever dreamed of. Egyptian women could inherit property and pass it on. They could write wills, bring lawsuits, and sign contracts. A female brewer might run her own tavern. A widow could manage a farm. A priestess could serve in temples, especially those of goddesses like Hathor and Isis. And though most women married young and spent their days raising children, they weren't locked into domestic invisibility. Their roles were essential and visible. Marriage was a partnership, and while men had social dominance, wives weren't voiceless. A woman could initiate divorce, reclaim her dowry, and keep custody of her children. If her husband mistreated her or failed to provide, she could leave, and often did. Legal papyri survive, in which women calmly argue for property, fairness, and dignity. Beauty was also power. Women adorned themselves with kohl eyeliner, scented oils, and intricate jewelry not just to attract attention, but to channel the divine. Appearance was spiritual. Makeup had protective properties, perfumes pleased the gods, and wigs signaled status. Femininity was a force, not a flaw, but not all women were equal. Social class mattered. A noblewoman might own an estate, command servants, and attend banquets. A peasant woman hauled water, ground grain, and gave birth in the dust. Both were respected for their roles, but only one had choices. Royal women held even more sway. Queens, like Nefertari and Tai, were depicted alongside their husbands in equal scale. A rare honor in ancient art. They advised kings, managed court affairs, and sometimes influenced policy. Queen Ahotep led armies. Queen Nefertiti ruled with Akhenaten in a period of radical religious change. But the most extraordinary figure, Hatshepsut, didn't just rule beside a man. She became the pharaoh. She wore the false beard, adopted male regalia, and was depicted as king in every temple. Under her reign, Egypt flourished with trade, architecture, and peace. Her stepson, Thutmose III, later tried to erase her from history, chipping her image from walls, smashing her statues, but she endures. A woman who took the throne and didn't just hold it, she owned it. And then there's Cleopatra, the last great pharaoh, a Macedonian Greek by blood, but Egyptian by culture. She ruled in an age of Roman ambition and internal decline. Fluent in many languages, brilliant in politics, she negotiated with Caesar, allied with Mark Antony, and died on her own terms. Her legend endures, not because she was beautiful, but because she was formidable. Still, ordinary women weren't queens and faced limits. They couldn't serve in the army or become high priests. Their voices, while respected, rarely shaped policy, and in times of crisis, their rights could shrink quickly. But the fact remains, in ancient Egypt, womanhood wasn't a curse, it was a calling. You could be a wife, a mother, a merchant, a goddess's servant, or even a king. And in a world ruled by gods and shaped by sand, that made all the difference. They didn't wield swords, they didn't wear crowns, they didn't build pyramids or fight in wars. But scribes, quiet, ink-stained, and endlessly patient, held more influence in ancient Egypt than most soldiers or even nobles. In a kingdom where the word was sacred, scribes controlled memory, law, and legacy. They were the human hard drives of a civilization obsessed with order and eternity. To become a scribe was to escape hard labor. You didn't plow, you didn't haul bricks, you didn't risk your life in battle. Instead, you studied, often in temple schools, known as the House of Life. From a young age, you memorized hieroglyphs, learned how to calculate rations and taxes, and copied sacred texts again and again until your hands ached. Literacy wasn't widespread. Reading and writing were skills of the elite, and scribes were the keepers of both. There were three main scripts: hieroglyphic, used for monuments and religious texts; hieratic, a cursive script, used for administrative work; and later, demotic, a shorthand for everyday use. A master scribe knew all three. He could write on papyrus walls, wood, linen, even astraca, broken pottery shards used for practice and correspondence. But scribes weren't just note-takers. They recorded court cases, calculated grain stores, documented births and deaths, copied medical spells, wrote letters for the illiterate, and drafted edicts from the pharaoh himself. Their work shaped how the government functioned, how temples managed land, and how kings were remembered. In tomb art, scribes appear with calm expressions and clean robes, often seated, stylus in hand, a palette of ink at their side. They were admired, envied, and protected. Some rose through the ranks to become treasurers, tax officials, or advisors. Others stayed humble, quietly preserving order with each line they drew. Scribes also shaped religion. They copied the Book of the Dead and inscribed prayers onto tomb walls. They recorded temple rituals and astronomical observations. If a god spoke through prophecy or dream, it was the scribe who put it into words. In many ways, they acted as translators between the mortal and divine, and their humor, subtle but sharp. Some astraca include sarcastic poems, cheeky caricatures of bosses, or complaints about long shifts. In their margins, we find the humanity of a class, often painted as stoic. They were overworked, underappreciated, and absolutely essential. Women scribes existed, though rarely. Most were temple-trained and served goddesses like Hathor or Isis, copying hymns and managing sacred texts. Their presence proves that knowledge, though guarded, wasn't always gendered. Becoming a scribe wasn't just about avoiding the fields, it was about entering a legacy. Egyptian texts praised scribes as the only ones whose names will not perish. Long after kings turned to dust, the scribes' words would remain on tomb walls, temple columns, and scrolls hidden in desert caves. In ancient Egypt, knowledge wasn't just power, it was permanence, and the scribe, hunched over his reed and ink, was the architect of memory, the silent hand that made empires last forever. For thousands of years, Egypt stood strong, unchallenged, magnificent, and seemingly eternal. Dynasties rose and fell, but the civilization itself endured like the Nile, constant, renewing, divine. But nothing lasts forever. Even the mightiest kingdom can wither. And ancient Egypt, for all its gods and gold, was no exception. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They came in waves: economic strain, weak pharaohs, foreign invasions, internal rebellion. The old kingdom collapsed first, not from war, but from drought and disunity. When the Nile failed to flood, famine followed. Central power broke apart. Local governors, nomarchs, acted as kings. Egypt became a patchwork of rival provinces, and for over a century, chaos reigned. The Middle Kingdom reunited Egypt, only for it to fracture again. This time, the invaders came. The Hyksos, Asiatic peoples, entered the delta, bringing new weapons, horses, and the dreaded chariot. For over 100 years, they ruled parts of northern Egypt until the native kings of Thebes rose in defiance and drove them out. This victory gave rise to the new kingdom, Egypt's Golden Age. Under Thutmose III, Ramses II, and Hatshepsut, Egypt stretched into Nubia and the Levant. Temples grew taller, tombs burrowed deeper, the empire shined. But with expansion came new pressures: foreign wars, costly monuments, and a bloated priesthood with growing power. Then came the religious revolution of Akhenaten, a pharaoh who tried to erase Egypt's gods in favor of one, Aten, the sun disk. Temples were closed, statues destroyed. The capital was moved to a new experimental city. Art became alien. And though Akhenaten's monotheism was short-lived, it destabilized Egypt's spiritual core. After his death, the old gods returned, but the unity they once inspired had fractured. By the time of Ramses III, Egypt was under siege. The mysterious Sea Peoples, a confederation of raiders and migrants, swept across the eastern Mediterranean. Ramses fought them off, but at great cost. Grain shortages, strikes, and corruption followed. Even the tomb workers at Deir el-Medina walked off the job, the first recorded labor strike in history. The empire began to shrink. Foreign dynasties, Libyan, Nubian, Assyrian, took the throne. Internal power shifted from pharaohs to priests. Egypt was still Egypt in name, but its heart had changed. Even the Valley of the Kings was robbed by its own officials. Faith faded. Bureaucracy ballooned. The magic bled out. Then came conquest. Persia, led by Cambyses, seized Egypt in 525 BCE. Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BCE, greeted as a liberator, but claiming the crown for Greece. Under his general Ptolemy, a new dynasty formed, Greek in blood, Egyptian in culture. It lasted nearly 300 years until Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, faced Rome. Her alliance with Mark Antony failed. Octavian, later Augustus Caesar, claimed Egypt in 30 BCE. From then on, it was a Roman province, no longer the seat of gods and kings. But collapse didn't erase Egypt. Its temples stood, its language whispered through scrolls, its monuments endured winds and time, and its spirit, resilient, enigmatic, immortal, still lives in every eye that stares up at a pyramid or reads the name of a forgotten queen. Empires fall, dust returns, but Egypt never truly died. Long after the last pharaoh fell, long after hieroglyphs turned to silence and temples crumbled under sand, ancient Egypt refused to be forgotten. Its legacy lingered, not just in stone, but in imagination. Egypt became more than a place. It became a myth, a mystery, a mirror held up to every era that followed. What they left behind is staggering. Pyramids that have defied time, obelisks that still pierce modern skylines, tombs whose colors remain vivid after 3,000 years. But even more enduring are the ideas that death is not the end, that memory holds power, that knowledge can defy the grave. Greek scholars like Herodotus visited Egypt in awe, calling it the cradle of wisdom. Romans mimicked its architecture and adopted its gods. In the Renaissance, artists and alchemists pored over ancient symbols, hoping to decode secrets hidden in scrolls and sarcophagi. Egypt became a source of wonder, both real and imagined. But for centuries, much of it remained locked away. The language was lost. Hieroglyphs became decorations, their meanings forgotten. Then, in 1799, a black stone was pulled from the Nile mud, the Rosetta Stone, with inscriptions in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It held the key to deciphering a dead language. Thanks to the work of scholars like Jean-François Champollion, Egypt spoke again. Suddenly, tombs told stories. Scrolls revealed recipes, hymns, and love letters. Mummies became more than curiosities. They became voices from the past. Egyptology was born, and with it came a wave of exploration, excavation, and, unfortunately, exploitation. Western museums filled with statues and sarcophagi. Private collectors hoarded jewelry, shabtus, and scrolls. Some items were bought, many were taken. Today, debates rage about where these treasures belong and who has the right to tell Egypt's story. In the 20th century, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb electrified the world. Newspapers dubbed it the Curse of the Pharaohs, when Lord Carnarvon died shortly after opening the tomb. But the real power of the find was cultural. Suddenly, Egypt was on jewelry, dresses, posters, films. It inspired everything from Art Deco design to Hollywood blockbusters. Even now, Egypt echoes in science fiction, fashion, and pop culture. The pyramid remains a symbol of mystery. The Eye of Horus shows up in video games and tattoos. Cleopatra is reimagined again and again, sometimes as seductress, sometimes as strategist. And mummies, well, they continue to walk in every corner of cinema, never quite staying dead. But beneath the spectacle, something deeper remains. Ancient Egypt teaches us about permanence and impermanence, about how power fades, but stories endure, about how a civilization can vanish from the map, but live forever in the minds of those who remember. What they left behind is more than gold or stone. It's a blueprint for awe, a reminder that humanity, even in its oldest forms, is capable of greatness. That people who lived, loved, feared, and dreamed beneath a different sun were, in essence, not so different from us. And as long as we gaze at the pyramids, as long as we whisper the names of gods and pharaohs, Egypt will live. So, would you survive a day in ancient Egypt? It's easy to romanticize this world. Golden sarcophagi, lotus flowers, sunsets over the Nile. But if you truly woke up in Thebes or Memphis, barefoot and bewildered, survival would test every instinct you have. Because ancient Egypt was magnificent, but it was also merciless. Let's say you start the day as a farmer. You rise before dawn, your bed a reed mat, your roof thatched and leaky. The Nile has flooded, so you trudge through thick mud to sow barley. Your hands are calloused. Your back aches from years bent beneath the sun. There's no break, no weekend, just the rhythm of planting and harvest, life and death. Food is simple. Bread made from grain that often contains grit from the grinding stone, slowly wearing down your teeth. Beer is your water. Fish from the river is a blessing. Meat only on feast days, if you're lucky. And health, a cough could become fatal. A cut could fester. Snakes hide in the reeds. Crocodiles, too. There are no hospitals. If you fall ill, your options are garlic, spells, and prayer. Now imagine you're a woman. You're expected to marry young, bear many children, manage the household, fetch water, grind grain, and hold it all together while your husband works or serves in the military. Childbirth is dangerous. There's no anesthesia, no antibiotics, and no guarantee you'll survive the night. Or maybe you're a laborer at Giza, hauling stones for the pyramid. It's hot. The dust chokes your lungs. Your muscles scream. You sleep in crowded quarters and eat rations of bread and onions. You're proud, though you're building something eternal. You hope your name is remembered. It won't be. Suppose you're a scribe, educated, respected. Your hands are stained with ink. You live more comfortably, yes, but the pressure never stops. Every miswritten symbol is a risk. You write laws, prayers, curses, wills, and if you displease the wrong official, you could lose your position, or worse. And don't forget the gods. They watch everything. You perform rituals, leave offerings, and mutter protective spells. A missed prayer or broken taboo could invite disaster. Everything has divine consequence. Life is never just about you. It's about balance, about math. There's sand in your shoes, heat on your skin, smoke in the temples, and death always near. Tombs are everywhere, constant reminders that this life is only a trial and the real journey begins after. You hope your children survive. You hope your name is spoken. You hope your heart is light. So, would you last? Maybe, if you're strong, if you adapt, if you understand that survival here means more than endurance. It means knowing the cycles of the river, the sky, the gods, and the state. It means waking each day and accepting the dust, the gods, the pharaoh, and fate. Ancient Egypt was not for the faint-hearted, but for those who endured. Even the poorest soul, there was a chance to be remembered, to be reborn, to become a story etched in stone. And so, after walking in worn sandals through the dust of dynasties, what have we learned? That ancient Egypt wasn't just a land of pharaohs and pyramids. It was a living, breathing civilization of real people. Farmers who bent to the floodplains, women who raised families under the eye of Isis, scribes who captured eternity with a flick of the pen, and children who played under painted ceilings while jackals howled in the distance. It was a world where beauty masked hardship, where divinity shadowed daily life, and where every heartbeat echoed through tomb walls and temple hymns. To survive here, you needed more than muscle. You needed reverence, adaptability, and a belief that everything, every grain, every scarab, every whispered prayer mattered. You couldn't afford to be careless. You had to respect the gods, the seasons, the rules of Mat. You needed to know your place, whether in the fields, the court, or the afterlife. And even if your name was never carved in stone, you lived with the hope that someone, somewhere, would remember it, that your soul might be judged fairly, that you might walk among the reeds forever. Today, we inherit their silence. We gaze into hollow eyes of painted coffins. We read fragments of love poems, medical spells, and tax records, and we realize they were not so different from us. They laughed, feared, danced, mourned, and dreamed, and now they sleep. But if you close your eyes and listen, truly listen, you might still hear the sound of a scribe's brush, the flutter of linen robes, or the chanting of priests beneath a full moon. Their world is gone, but their story remains, carved into time, waiting to be told. So, if you've made it this far through sandstorms and scrolls, thank you. And if you find yourself longing for more forgotten voices, more slow-burning journeys through ancient worlds, don't forget to subscribe to Medieval Nocturnes, because sleep comes easier when it's carried by history. And here, the past never stays buried for long. Good night, and may your heart weigh no more than a feather.